If you're looking to barbecue this weekend and want something new to try, make it this one. This is my barbecue pork ribs recipe. I get my ribs from a butcher, so you can ask for extra chunky ones. You can see these are beautifully meaty, and I asked him to trim them into individual ribs. Spread those out in a tray. I used a big roasting tin like this one. And then onto there, you want to add a couple of tablespoons of either dark or light brown soft sugar, a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper, a teaspoon of ground cumin. You want a couple of teaspoons of ordinary paprika, and then also a couple of teaspoons of smoked paprika if you have some. I just used up the tail end of my pot there. And then go in there with a teaspoon or two of onion granules or onion powder. You could otherwise use just a chopped onion. I'd run out of garlic powder, but either use a couple of teaspoons of garlic powder or 4 fat cloves of garlic and squeeze those over the top. And then, again, I didn't have any mustard powder, so I just used a couple of teaspoons of English mustard that was already made up. But otherwise, you could use a couple of teaspoons of mustard powder. And then using your hands, you can use gloves if you like, give everything a really jolly good rub in, pack it back into the tray. At this point, I realised I'd forgotten salt, so added a couple of teaspoons of good quality sea salt over the top. And then cover it. I use baking parchment followed by foil later on, because I don't really like the foil sat on the meat for too long. I left that in the fridge with the rub on for about an hour or so. You could leave it for 2 days if you wanted to. But when you're ready to then slowly cook your meat, spread or chop up an onion, spread that over the top, and then 4 or 6 cloves of garlic. Again, just hack them up. It doesn't need to be pretty, and pop those over the top as well. And then I had a handful of thyme. You could use rosemary, you could use sage. Now spread everything out, and then you want to pop your liquids in there. So I use 500 mils of cider and about 250 mils of apple juice. And then I also mixed together a tablespoon of Dijon mustard and a couple of tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. I didn't want to get my hands back in there, so I mixed the two together in a little cup and then poured those over. And then you want to pop your parchment followed by a tight covering of tin foil over your roasting tin, and then roast or really slowly bake that little lot in the oven at about 130 degrees or 140 if you're in a normal oven and it's not fan, for about 2.5 to 3 hours until they are super tender. In the meantime, you can make your barbecue sauce. So into a pan, add 200 grams or 200 mils of ketchup, 100 milliliters or 100 grams of apple juice, 50 mils or about 3 tablespoons of cider vinegar, 75 grams or 3 tablespoons of dark brown sugar, 3 tablespoons of honey, and then you want to add in 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, and a tablespoon of soy sauce. It doesn't matter really if it's light or dark. And then a tablespoon of Dijon mustard or a couple of teaspoons of Dijon mustard. Then you want to add into there about a teaspoon of smoked paprika and half a teaspoon of chipotle flakes. Just be careful because they can be a little bit spicy. Also add in a couple of cloves of crushed garlic and then boil it until it's reduced and thick. So it should take about 15 minutes. In the meantime, once your ribs are done, just double check them with a fork. Make sure they are on the road to being extremely fork tender, although not quite falling off the bone. And then I also like to add some of that cooking liquor into my sauce and then re-reduce it down again, which might sound like a faff, but then you get that just lots of extra flavour. It is really it's worth the faff. Now brush about 2/3 of that sauce all over your ribs on all sides. And then you can either fridge these at this point or freeze them, or you can barbecue them just to finish them off. Obviously they are already cooked, but you want to just make sure that they're hot all the way through to the centre and that they've got that lovely colour. Now I like to serve mine with something like a slaw. I've made a funky red cabbage slaw here with some sriracha and lime and some homemade chips. Enjoy, and be sure to follow us along for more recipes.